Two black twins sit in the corner of a quiet bar. Suddenly the door bursts open. 3 cops walk in, eyes sharp, voices dripping with hate. "Double the chocolate, double the trouble," one sneers. The others close in, shoving chairs, knocking over glasses, their laughter turning cruel. Then they shout, they're resisting arrest. Snap on the cuffs and haul the twins to the station. But soon, they'll regret because they just picked the wrong people to mess with. Before we dive in, where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. The familiar Friday night atmosphere inside Finnerty's pub, the low laughter, the scrape of chairs and the easy rhythm of the crowd. Twin siblings Danielle Carter and Daniel Carter sat in a corner booth, their beer bottles cold and untouched, nursing a sour taste left by a difficult funeral. Marcus Hale, their friend and Daniel's former squadmate, deserved better than the Bureau's vague explanation of his death. He'd been chasing something called Project Echo 7, a rumored contract between the Bureau and a defense contractor named Helion Systems, and whatever he found had died with him. Danielle felt bone-deep exhaustion. Across from her, Daniel, still moving like the soldier he was, constantly scanned the room, the exits, the faces, the body language, a remnant of old training that never truly left him. Marcus had loved this place, saying it reminded him of home before everything got complicated. The door swung open, bringing with it a gust of cold air and the heavy smell of whiskey and ego. 3 men entered, moving with the particular swagger of people who believed they owned the space. A 4th lingered by the door, watchful and uneasy. They were not in uniform, but their bearing screamed law enforcement. Leading the group was Sergeant Elias Drummond, a broad man in his mid-40s whose face had been etched with bitterness. Behind him were Officer Cole Rivers, red-faced, and Kyle Boyd, barely 30, already drunk enough to think he was immortal. Drummond's gaze swept the room, landing on the Carters, 2 black strangers sitting quietly. He gave a low whistle that sliced through the music. "Didn't know this town got visitors that dark," he announced, loud enough for half the bar to hear. Danielle, whose FBI training at Quantico had kicked in, activated her de-escalation protocol. "We're here to honor a friend, officer, that's all. No trouble intended," she said evenly. Drummond smirked, eyes narrowing. "Oh, Marcus Hale, right, the do-gooder cop who thought he could play hero. Guess he found out what that gets you." His laugh was low and ugly, hanging in the air like a bruise. Daniel, a Ranger School veteran, tightened his hand around his glass before deliberately setting it down, a gesture that served as a warning. Rivers leaned in, resting a heavy hand on Daniel's chair. He smirked. "Double the chocolate, double the trouble, huh?" The younger officer, Boyd, had also muttered, "Twice the black, twice the problem," just loud enough for them to hear. Daniel's voice was low, calm, and dangerous. "Walk away while you still can." Ignoring the warning, Drummond dragged a chair over, its legs screeching against the floor. He sat down close to Danielle, asserting, "Guess they forgot who keeps the peace around here." Rivers slid his hand higher onto Daniel's shoulder, pressing harder to test the line. "Take your hand off me," Daniel demanded. Behind the bar, Owen Thompson, the bartender, appeared, attempting to keep his voice steady. "Gentlemen, maybe let's—" "Shut up, Owen," Drummond barked without turning. "Go wash some dishes before I decide to check your papers again." Owen's face flushed, but he didn't argue. Instead, he discreetly pulled his phone from his apron pocket and hit the record button. Boyd staggered forward, sloshing beer across the Carter's table. "Look at that, 2 proud folks think they're better than cops," he sneered. Danielle's tone turned to ice. "Choose your next words carefully." "Oh yeah." Boyd bent close, reeking of liquor. "What are you gonna do, sweetheart? Dressed like that, you're practically asking for attention." Daniel's hand shifted toward his pocket, but Danielle caught his eye and subtly shook her head. "Not yet." Drummond grinned, sensing control. "Here's what's gonna happen. You 2 apologize for your attitude, buy us a round, and maybe we forget this little disrespect." Danielle took a slow drink of water, set the glass down with care, and met his eyes. "Here's what's actually going to happen. You're going to take your hand off my brother, step away from our table and leave, because right now, Sergeant, you're making a mistake you won't be able to take back." As Danielle stood, Drummond made his critical error. His hand came down hard on her lower back, sliding down in an unmistakably offensive gesture. The entire bar froze. Daniel moved instantly. 1 second he was seated, the next he had Drummond's wrist locked in a grip that twisted the sergeant's arm behind his back, his face pressed against the table. "Touch her again," Daniel said, his voice calm but lethal, "and you'll need a new arm." Drummond hissed through clenched teeth, muscles straining uselessly against the hold. For a moment, fear flickered behind his eyes, then anger took over. As Daniel released him and stepped back, Drummond stumbled upright, red-faced and shaking. His free hand dropped toward the gun holstered at his belt, fingers fumbling for the grip. Officer Torres, quiet until this point, interjected, "Drummond, let it go." They were leaving. "Shut up, Torres. They need to learn respect," Drummond yelled. Rivers yanked Daniel's arm, grinding the joint. Danielle slapped Drummond's hand away when he reached for her again, her voice trembling with fury. "Touch me one more time, and you'll regret it." She pulled a small leather wallet from her jacket. "Special Agent Danielle Carter, FBI. You're assaulting a federal officer," she announced, her voice cutting through the room. Drummond let out a slow, mocking laugh. "Federal, huh? Around here that just means outsider." Rivers already had his cuffs out, ready for action. A cruiser idled outside, engine running, as if this scene had been rehearsed. Drummond leaned close to Daniel, taunting him about his military service. "You think that uniform makes you special? I was Army 2 Ranger, got the tab and everything, but I knew when to stay in my place." Daniel's expression narrowed slightly. "When were you discharged, Sergeant?" "That's none of your damn business." Gray Falcon operation. Daniel pressed. "Around 3 years ago." Drummond's face went white, then red. "How the hell do you?" "Because I signed your discharge papers, Sergeant Drummond." Daniel stated, his tone calm. "You were removed from command for giving an illegal firing order that resulted in civilian casualties. You're lucky you weren't court-martialed." The bar went deathly still. Torres took a step back, his instincts finally overriding his allegiance. Just then, the glow of red and blue lights flashed through the window. Drummond instantly recovered, burying his shame under a veneer of official authority. "You're both under arrest for assaulting an officer and disturbing the peace. We're taking them to county," he announced. As Boyd locked the handcuffs around Danielle's wrists, Drummond leaned in close. "In this town, sweetheart," he whispered, "you don't talk back to white cops." Rivers shoved Daniel toward the waiting patrol car. Inside the bar, the only sound was the faint hum of Owen Thompson's phone, still recording everything. And just like that, the night swallowed the Carters whole. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the dingy hallway as Drummond and Boyd shoved the siblings forward. Their footsteps echoed against the scuffed linoleum floor, punctuated by the jingling of handcuff chains. "Welcome to your new home," Drummond sneered, his alcohol-soaked breath hot against Danielle's neck. He grabbed her arm harder, fingers digging into her skin as they approached the holding cells. The booking area was empty except for a bored-looking desk sergeant, who barely glanced up from his crossword puzzle. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m., its second hand ticking away with maddening slowness. Boyd fumbled with the cell keys, his movements still unsteady from drinking. "Ladies first," he mocked, swinging open the door to the first holding cell. The metal hinges screamed in protest, the sound setting teeth on edge. Danielle stumbled as Drummond pushed her roughly into the cell, her shoulder hitting the concrete wall. Without removing her handcuffs, he slammed the door shut. The lock clicked with a sound of finality. "I want my phone call," Danielle demanded, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. "It's our right." Drummond leaned against the bars, a cruel smile playing across his face. "Rights? You got no rights here. This ain't the FBI building with your fancy rules." He turned to Boyd. "Put the other one in cell 2, keep them separated." Daniel resisted as Boyd grabbed his arm, planting his feet. "This is illegal detention. You're making it worse for yourselves." His words earned him a hard shove that sent him sprawling onto the floor of the second cell. "Shut your mouth," Boyd snapped, slamming his cell door. "Before I give you something real to complain about." The siblings exchanged looks through the bars separating their cells. Danielle's face was set in a mask of controlled anger, while Daniel's eyes blazed with barely contained fury. They'd been through tough situations before, but this felt different, more personal, more dangerous. Drummond settled behind the booking desk, pulling out incident report forms with exaggerated ceremony. Now let's see, what should we charge you with? He began writing, his pen scratching against the paper. Resisting arrest definitely. Assaulting an officer, you did take a swing at Boyd, didn't you? He winked at his fellow officer. That's a lie, Daniel protested, gripping the cell bars. There are witnesses, witnesses. Boyd laughed, joining Drummond at the desk. Ain't nobody saw nothing, right, Drummond? Drummond nodded, continuing to write. Disturbing the peace, disorderly conduct, threatening an officer. He listed off charges like he was reading a menu, each one more fabricated than the last. The sound of dress shoes clicking against the floor drew their attention. Sheriff Malcolm Keel appeared in the doorway, his silver hair perfectly combed despite the late hour. His presence seemed to lower the temperature in the room. Gentlemen, he said quietly, his calm voice somehow more threatening than Drummond's loud threats. I understand we have some federal agents causing trouble in my town. He picked up Drummond's incomplete paperwork, reviewing it with practiced indifference. His eyes scanned the charges, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. My, quite a list of infractions. Danielle stepped forward in her cell. Sheriff Keel, your officers physically assaulted us without cause, falsely arrested us, and are now fabricating charges. You demand nothing. Keel cut her off, his voice still eerily pleasant. He walked slowly between the cells, hands clasped behind his back. You know it's interesting, we get outsiders in here sometimes, thinking their fancy titles mean something. Thinking they can come in and investigate. He stopped in front of Daniel's cell, studying him like a specimen under glass. Bad things tend to happen to people who push too hard in my town. People disappear into the system. Paperwork gets lost. Charges multiply. His smile never reached his eyes. Even FBI badges won't save you from that. The threat hung in the air like smoke, choking the oxygen from the room. Drummond and Boyd exchanged satisfied smirks, enjoying the show their boss was putting on. You can't intimidate us, Daniel said, his voice low and dangerous. We've dealt with corrupt cops before. Keel chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. Corrupt? That's such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as maintaining order. My order. He straightened his collar. You have a choice. You can take your disorderly conduct charges, spend the night here, and leave town tomorrow with your tails between your legs. Or, he let the alternative hang unspoken. Or what? Danielle challenged. You'll make us disappear. Add us to your collection of victims. Victims? Keel's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. I don't see any victims here. Just two troublemakers who attacked my officers and are now facing the consequences of their actions. That's what the paperwork will show anyway. He handed the forms back to Drummond. Finish processing them. I want everything done by the book. Our book. With a final cold smile at the siblings, he turned to leave. Drummond and Rivers returned to their paperwork, now emboldened by their sheriff's approval. The scratching of their pens mixed with their occasional laughter as they invented more details for their false report. Daniel pressed against the bars, separating himself from Danielle, his voice barely above a whisper. This isn't about us, he said, watching his sister's face in the harsh fluorescent light. It's about how many others they've buried. The hours crawled by like years. The station had grown quiet, with only the occasional shuffle of feet or distant phone ring breaking the silence. The clock now read 2:13 a.m., and the siblings had settled into a watchful waiting game. Daniel paced his cell, 6 steps forward, 6 steps back, his bare feet cold against the concrete floor. Their shoes had been taken during processing, along with their phones and jewelry. Standard procedure, they'd said, though nothing about this was standard. Danielle sat on her thin metal bunk, back straight against the wall, eyes focused on the hallway. Neither sibling had spoken much since Keel's threat, but their minds were racing, cataloging every detail, every face, every word spoken. The sound of soft footsteps drew their attention. A young officer appeared, carrying 2 paper bags and paper cups of water. Lena Thompson. They'd noticed her earlier, hovering at the edges of the booking area, her discomfort with the situation visible in her tense shoulders and averted eyes. "Dinner?" she announced loud enough for anyone listening to hear. "Standard issue sandwich and chips." Her voice dropped to barely above a breath as she approached Daniel's cell first. "Don't trust anyone here. This isn't the first time." Daniel accepted the paper bag, his fingers brushing against Thompson's hand. He felt something slip between them. A small folded piece of paper. Without changing his expression, he let it slide into his palm. Thompson moved to Danielle's cell, maintaining the pretense of routine food delivery. Her movements were careful, measured, as if being watched. "The water fountain's broken, so you'll have to make do with cups," she said at normal volume, then whispered, "They do this at least once a month. Usually to people passing through." Danielle took her meal, her face a mask of resignation for any watching eyes. "Thank you, officer," she said, slumping onto her bunk as if defeated. After Thompson left, the siblings ate in silence, but their minds were racing. Daniel waited until he heard the night shift changing in the distance before carefully unfolding the note under his thin blanket. A phone number was written in tight, neat handwriting, followed by the words, "Emergency contact." They've done this before. He tore the edge of his paper bag, using it to memorize the phone number before eating the note. The sandwich was stale, the chips staler, but they ate everything. They needed their strength. Through the small window high in the wall, they could see the moon hanging like a watchful eye. A drunk was brought in around 3 a.m., his loud protests echoing through the holding area. Drummond and Boyd appeared, roughing him up more than necessary before throwing him in a cell further down. They paused to leer at the siblings. "How are our FBI superstars doing?" Drummond taunted, rapping his nightstick against the bars. "Not feeling so tough now, are you?" Daniel kept his eyes down, shoulders slumped. Danielle curled up on her bunk, turning her face to the wall. They heard Boyd laugh. "Look at that," he said. "All that attitude gone already. Maybe they're learning their place." "About time," Drummond agreed. Sheriff was right. They ain't so special after all. The officer's footsteps faded away, followed by the sound of a door closing. The siblings remained in their poses of defeat, until they were sure they were alone. "They're getting sloppy," Danielle whispered. "Overconfident." Daniel nodded slightly. "Did you see the camera in the corner?" "It's just for show, the red light isn't on." "No recording system," Danielle confirmed. "They don't want evidence of what happens in here." "But that works both ways." Daniel shifted on his bunk, keeping his voice low. "They can't prove what we do or don't do either." The night stretched on, marked by the occasional check from the desk sergeant, clearly one of Keel's trusted men given his smirk each time he passed. The siblings maintained their act of broken spirits, heads down, shoulders slumped, occasional movements for effect. Around 4 a.m., they heard Drummond and Boyd returning from what sounded like another call. Their voices carried down the hallway, bourbon loud and unguarded. "Just like the Thompson girl last month," Boyd was saying. "These ones thought their fancy badges would save them. Nobody's badges mean nothing here." Drummond laughed. "Sheriff's got judges in his pocket all the way to the county line." The siblings exchanged glances in the dim light. Each new conversation was another piece of evidence, another thread in the web. They were beginning to understand, this wasn't just about power-hungry cops, this was systematic, organized, protected. As dawn approached, they could hear the station beginning to wake up. The day shift would be arriving soon, bringing new eyes and new opportunities. They had to play this smart, had to make everyone believe they were exactly what they wanted. 2 more broken victims added to their collection. Danielle shifted closer to the bars, separating their cells, her voice barely a whisper. "They think we're broken. Let's use that." The first rays of morning light crept through the high window, painting pale squares on the concrete floor. Daniel and Danielle lay still on their bunks, breathing steady and deep, appearing to have finally succumbed to exhaustion. In reality, every sense was alert, gathering intelligence. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, accompanied by the clink of glass bottles. Drummond's voice carried clearly through the station's quiet halls. "Man, I needed this after dealing with those stuck-up feds." "Hell yeah," Boyd agreed, settling into a chair that creaked under his weight. "Bourbon makes everything better." Rivers' voice joined in, slightly slurred. "Remember that family on Oak Street last summer? The way that mother cried when we found that bag of pills in her son's room." Daniel kept his breathing steady, though his heart raced. The hidden microphone sewn into Danielle's collar, standard FBI equipment they hadn't thought to check for, was picking up every word. She shifted slightly, angling her body to better capture the conversation. "That was classic." Drummond chuckled, ice cubes clinking in his glass. "Kids swore up and down they weren't his. But who's going to believe some teenager over 3 officers of the law? 5 years minimum," Boyd added proudly. "That's another one off the streets." "Sheriff says we're doing important work," Rivers said, "keeping the neighborhood clean. That's what he told the mayor last month at the fundraiser." Danielle's mind worked like a computer, cataloging names, dates, locations. Her FBI training had honed her memory to near perfection. Every detail could be crucial: the mother's tears, the planted evidence, the fundraiser connection. "Speaking of cleaning up," Drummond continued, his chair scraping against the floor as he leaned forward. "Remember the Williams property? 3 generations living in that house on Maple, until we got creative with that seizure." Boyd laughed. "Now it's that nice new coffee shop. Development company sure was grateful." "That envelope the sheriff got wasn't exactly thin," Rivers added. The bourbon kept flowing, loosening their tongues further. Stories spilled out like poison, falsified reports, planted weapons, convenient computer errors that made evidence disappear. Each confession was another nail in their coffin, recorded in crisp digital quality. Daniel fought to keep his breathing steady as his anger built. These weren't just corrupt cops, they were orchestrating the systematic destruction of families, futures, lives. His sister's hidden mic caught it all. Dates, names, specific incidents. "Hey, you remember that teacher?" Boyd's voice got louder as he grew more drunk. "The one who tried to file that complaint about us roughing up her student." "Man, that was smooth," Drummond replied. "One little bag of evidence in her desk drawer, and suddenly she's not so credible anymore. Lost her license and everything." "Sheriff called it preventive maintenance," Rivers added with a harsh laugh. "Can't have people thinking they can challenge us." Through barely open eyes, Danielle watched their reflections in the polished metal toilet. 3 men, badges still pinned to their chests, drinking stolen bourbon and laughing about destroyed lives. She memorized their gestures, their specific words, the way Drummond led the conversations, and Boyd eagerly followed. "Remember that grandmother last month," Boyd was saying now. "The one who kept filing complaints about police harassment." "Yeah, her grandson's doing 15 years, Drummond replied proudly. "Amazing what you can do with a little creativity and an unregistered weapon." She shut up real quick after that. "They all do eventually," Rivers added. The conversation drifted into technical details: which judges were in their pocket, which evidence lockers had faulty cameras, which desk sergeants could be trusted to lose paperwork. Each word was another thread in the web of corruption they were mapping. A door opened somewhere in the station, and the men quickly gathered their bottles. "Shift change soon," Drummond muttered. "Better clear this out." "What about them?" Boyd asked, nodding toward the cells. "Think they learned their lesson?" "Oh yeah," Drummond said confidently. "Look at them out cold. By morning they'll be begging to drop everything and leave town just like all the others." Their footsteps retreated, followed by the sound of bottles being hidden and chairs scraped back into place. The station began to show signs of waking: distant phones ringing, doors opening and closing, voices carrying from the front desk. When the corridor was completely clear, Daniel opened his eyes fully, meeting his sister's gaze. They didn't need words to communicate. They'd been doing this their whole lives. Danielle raised an eyebrow slightly, asking the silent question, "Did you get it all?" Daniel gave an almost imperceptible nod toward her collar where the microphone was hidden. Hours of drunken confessions, all captured in perfect digital quality. Names, dates, specific crimes. Enough to start an investigation that would rip the roof off this corrupt department. But they had to be smart. One wrong move and that evidence would disappear, just like all the other evidence these men had made vanish over the years. They needed to get the recording out, needed to contact someone who could help, needed to protect their proof. The siblings lay still as early morning light filled their cells. Their bodies appeared defeated, their spirits seemingly crushed, exactly what their captors wanted to see. But beneath that careful facade, their minds were racing, planning, coordinating without words. Daniel shifted slightly closer to the bars between their cells. "We've got them," he breathed, his lips barely moving. "All we need is the right moment." The morning shift brought new faces and fresh contempt. Officers paraded past their cells, some sneering, others pointedly ignoring them. But one face stood out, Officer Lena Thompson, her dark eyes carrying a hint of sympathy beneath her professional mask. She waited until the corridor cleared before approaching with their breakfast trays. "Eat quickly," she whispered, sliding the bland oatmeal through the slots. "I can get you to a phone, but we have to time this perfectly." Daniel studied the young officer's face, looking for any sign of deception. But Thompson's hands trembled slightly as she straightened her uniform, the gesture of someone taking a real risk. "Why help us?" Danielle asked softly, stirring her oatmeal without eating it. Thompson glanced over her shoulder before responding. "Because I've seen what they do, how they destroy people, and I'm tired of being part of it." She explained her plan in quick hushed sentences, the ancient landline in the file room, rarely used now that everyone had cells, the 10-minute gap between shift changes, the camera blind spot behind the metal filing cabinets. "I'll create a distraction," Thompson promised. "You'll have maybe 5 minutes, make them count." The siblings shared a look, weighing their options. The recording was crucial evidence, but without outside help, it might never see the light of day. They needed an ally higher up, someone with real power. When shift change came, Thompson's timing was perfect. A crash echoed from the front desk, followed by shouting about spilled coffee and ruined paperwork. Keys jingled quietly in their cell locks. "Now," Thompson hissed, leading them quickly down the back corridor. The file room smelled of dust and forgotten papers. Thompson pointed to the phone tucked behind a cabinet, then took up position by the door. "Hurry." Daniel's fingers shook slightly as he dialed the emergency contact number from Thompson's note. The line rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. "This is Morales." "Mr. Morales, this is Major Daniel Carter, Army Rangers. We're being held illegally at the Brant County Sheriff's Station. We have evidence of massive corruption, multiple officers on tape confessing to." "Stop," Morales cut in, his voice urgent. "Don't say another word over this line. They monitor everything." He paused. "Rafael Morales, I used to work internal affairs here before they forced me out." "How bad is it?" "Bad," Daniel said simply. "Years of planted evidence, false arrests, systematic targeting, all recorded." Morales was quiet for a moment. "Can you get out?" "We're working on it. There's a journalist, Maya Green. She's been trying to expose this for years, but nobody would talk. And there's someone else. Judge Wilkes, retired circuit judge. He's been documenting their cases, waiting for someone brave enough to take them on." Thompson appeared in the doorway, face tight with urgency. "Someone's coming. We have to move." "I'll contact them," Morales said quickly. "Get that recording out safely. Don't trust anyone in that building." They barely made it back to their cells before heavy footsteps approached. Drummond's massive frame filled the corridor, his face split by a cruel grin. He was holding something, a phone. Their blood ran cold as he held it up, displaying a text message. Well, he drawled. "Just got an interesting message. Seems someone's been making unauthorized calls." His eyes narrowed. "You two think you're clever, don't you?" Danielle exploded forward, her fist striking the cell bars with enough force to make them ring. The sound echoed through the station like a bell of rage. "You corrupt piece of now." Drummond cut her off, wagging his finger. "Is that any way to talk to an officer of the law?" Daniel stood perfectly still, his fury running so deep it had crystallized into something cold and sharp. They had tried to reach out for help, and somehow Drummond knew. Either Thompson had betrayed them, or the corruption ran even deeper than they'd imagined. "What's wrong?" Drummond taunted. "Realizing nobody's coming to save you. That's right, you're all alone here. No backup, no cavalry, no justice, just us." He strutted closer to Danielle's cell, clearly enjoying her rage. "You know what's funny? You actually thought you could outsmart us. But we've been doing this for 20 years, we know every trick. Danielle's knuckles were white from gripping the bars, but her voice came out deadly calm. Then you've gotten sloppy. 20 years of getting away with it makes you think you're untouchable. Drummond's smirk faltered for just a moment, because it wasn't the threat of a desperate prisoner. It was a promise from someone who had nothing left to lose, and everything to prove. He covered his unease with a harsh laugh, and walked away. But the siblings' eyes followed him, calculating, planning. Later that night, Thompson slipped back to their cells, her steps quick but cautious. I have a message, she whispered, pretending to check their restraints. Rafael Morales, he wants you to know he's already reached out. People are ready to help. Daniel leaned closer to the bars. What do you mean? Owen Thompson, the bartender. He's my brother, she explained softly. He had cameras, hidden ones for security. The night at the bar, he got everything. But he needs help getting the footage out safely. Hope flickered in Danielle's eyes. Can you arrange contact? Thompson nodded slightly. Maya Green, investigative journalist. She's been trying to expose corruption here for years. Morales already contacted her. She's coming tomorrow under the pretense of interviewing you about your criminal behavior. The next day Maya arrived with her press credentials and recording equipment. The guards let her in, smirking at what they assumed would be another hit piece against two troublemaking federal agents. Maya was sharp-featured and intense, her pressed blazer at odds with the grimy interview room. She set up her recorder with practiced efficiency, then leaned in close as she adjusted her microphone. Owen contacted me, she whispered. I've seen the footage, but there's more, so much more. What do you mean? Danielle asked quietly. Maya pulled out a legal pad, ostensibly taking notes for her article. But what she wrote made both siblings' eyes widen. Judge Wilkes has been collecting evidence for years. Police brutality cases, patterns of false arrests, financial records. She glanced at the guard outside, then mouthed silently, meeting tonight. Wilkes's house. Owen bringing footage. I have files. We need your recording. Danielle glanced at the guard, then whispered, how do we get out? Maya wrote Thompson is helping coordinate. 2 hours during shift change. Timeline critical. The rest of the interview proceeded normally, Maya asking pointed questions while the siblings gave carefully vague answers. But underneath plans were forming, hope building like a slow tide. That evening everything aligned. During shift change, Thompson accidentally disabled the cell block cameras for maintenance. The siblings were moved to separate holding rooms for questioning, rooms with windows facing the Thompsoning lot. Within minutes, they were in Maya's car, crouched low beneath blankets as she drove calmly past the station's security checkpoint. The guard barely glanced at her press pass. Judge Wilkes's house was modest but well kept, set back from the road behind old oak trees. The judge himself answered the door, tall and dignified despite his age, with kind eyes that carried decades of witnessed injustice. Welcome, he said simply, ushering them inside. We have much to discuss. Owen was already there, his laptop open on the dining room table. I have everything, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Not just that night, years of footage, them bragging about planted evidence, beating suspects, shaking down businesses. The judge nodded grimly. And I have the court records to match. Cases where evidence appeared mysteriously. Witnesses who changed their stories after conversations with officers. Patterns of targeted harassment. Maya spread her own files across the table, bank accounts in offshore locations, suspicious property purchases, a network of corruption reaching all the way to state level. And now we have proof from inside, Danielle added, carefully removing the hidden microphone from her collar. Their confessions. Everything they said, thinking we were asleep. They worked through the night, piecing together evidence, building connections, documenting patterns. Owen's footage provided faces and confessions. The judge's records showed the legal framework of corruption. Maya's financial investigations exposed the money trail. And the siblings' recording tied it all together with their own criminal admissions. Look at this, Daniel said, pointing to a pattern in the arrest records. Every time someone tried to speak up, they were arrested within days. Then their lives were systematically destroyed, jobs lost, families harassed, homes foreclosed. They're not just corrupt, the judge said heavily. They're organized, efficient. This is generations of systematic oppression refined into a machine. But machines can be broken, Maya countered, her eyes bright with purpose. We have what we need. Real evidence, multiple sources, irrefutable proof. Owen nodded firmly. And witnesses. People are ready to talk now. They just needed to know they weren't alone. The judge smiled slightly. In all my years on the bench, I've never seen a case this strong, or people this determined to see justice done. Morales arrived near midnight, bringing more evidence he'd kept hidden for years, internal affairs reports that had been buried, testimony from officers who'd been forced out for trying to expose the truth, financial records showing payments from the department to criminal enterprises. I've been waiting for this moment since they drove me out, Morales said, spreading his documents across the table, waiting for someone brave enough to stand up to them. As dawn approached, papers covered every surface, laptops hummed, phones buzzed with messages from more people coming forward, each with their own piece of the puzzle, their own story of injustice. Danielle stood by the window, watching the sky lighten. The weight of all they'd learned, all they were fighting for, settled on her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a source of strength. She turned to the room, to these allies who had risked everything to help them, to her brother who had never wavered, to the growing stack of evidence that would expose decades of corruption. We're fighting for more than just us now, she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. The others looked up, seeing in her face the same fire that burned in their own hearts, the unshakable belief that justice, though long delayed, would finally be served. We need to go public with this, Maya said, but we have to be smart. They'll try to stop us. They'll try to destroy the evidence, the judge agreed. Make copies, multiple copies, distribute them. And we need protection, Daniel added. Once this goes public, we'll all be targets. Morales pulled out his phone. I know people at the state attorney general's office, people who aren't on Keel's payroll. Let me make some calls. As the sun rose over the town, they finalized their plan. Maya would break the story simultaneously across multiple platforms, her own publication, national news outlets, social media. The judge would file formal complaints with state and federal agencies. Owen would release his footage to the public, and the siblings would present their evidence directly to the state attorney general. We do this together, Danielle said, looking around the room. All at once. They can't silence all of us. Tomorrow morning, Maya confirmed. We hit them with everything. But as they prepared to leave, headlights swept across the front windows. A car was pulling into the driveway, not a police cruiser, but an unmarked sedan. Everyone froze. Back door, the judge whispered urgently. Go, now. They didn't make it 2 steps before the truth hit Danielle like ice. They'd been tracked for days. Blythe's people had known exactly where they were. The front door burst open, and Deputy Director Adrian Blythe stepped inside, credentials raised high, his expression carved from stone. The front door burst open, and Deputy Director Adrian Blythe stepped inside, his FBI credentials held high. Behind him, 2 agents in tactical gear swept the room with their weapons. Nobody move, Blythe ordered, his voice cold and authoritative. Danielle's heart sank. Blythe was her direct supervisor at the bureau, the man she'd trusted, the man she'd believed would help them. Sir, she started, but he cut her off with a sharp gesture. Agent Carter, Major Carter, you're both under arrest for theft of federal property, unauthorized disclosure of classified information, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. That's insane, Daniel protested. We're exposing corruption. You're destroying careers based on illegally obtained recordings, Blythe interrupted. Recordings made without proper warrants or authorization. Everything you've gathered here is inadmissible and illegal. Maya stepped forward, her phone already recording. Deputy Director Blythe, are you saying the FBI is covering up police corruption? Blythe's eyes narrowed. Turn that off. Now, this is a free press. One of the tactical agents moved toward Maya, but the judge stepped between them. You have no authority to silence the press, Deputy Director, and you have no warrant to be in my home. Blythe pulled out a document, federal warrant signed 2 hours ago. We're seizing all electronic devices and documents related to the illegal surveillance operation conducted by Agents Carter. The room erupted in protest, but the tactical agents moved with practiced efficiency, gathering laptops, phones, documents, everything they'd worked for, all the evidence they'd compiled, was being taken. Danielle watched in horror as years of corruption evidence disappeared into federal evidence bags. "Sir, you can't do this. Those people destroyed lives. Those officers were conducting legitimate law enforcement operations," Blythe said coldly. "Operations that you compromised with your illegal surveillance. The Bureau doesn't tolerate agents who break the law, even with good intentions." He nodded to his agents. "Take them into custody. The rest of you are free to go, but I'd advise you to forget everything you've seen here tonight. Interfering with a federal investigation carries serious consequences." As the tactical agents moved to handcuff the siblings, Danielle caught Maya's eye. The journalist's phone was still recording, hidden in her jacket pocket. The red light blinked steadily. Not everything was lost. Not yet. The federal holding facility was nothing like the county jail. Clean, modern, efficient and completely isolating. Daniel and Danielle were separated immediately, placed in different wings with no communication allowed. Danielle sat alone in her cell, replaying Blythe's betrayal in her mind. She'd worked under him for 3 years, trusted his guidance, believed in his commitment to justice. But his appearance at the judge's house had been too quick, too coordinated. He'd known exactly where to find them. Someone had tipped him off. 3 days passed in isolation. No phone calls, no visitors, no information about charges or hearings. Just silence, and the growing dread that everything they'd fought for had been for nothing. On the 4th day, Blythe appeared outside her cell. He was alone, no guards, no witnesses. He pulled up a chair and sat down, his expression unreadable. "You could have had a brilliant career," he said quietly. "Rising star in the Bureau. First black female agent to make deputy director by 40. I was grooming you for it." Danielle said nothing, just stared at him with cold contempt. "But you couldn't leave well enough alone," Blythe continued. "Had to go digging into things that don't concern you. Had to play hero." "They were destroying innocent people," Danielle said, her voice flat. "They were maintaining order," Blythe corrected. "Sometimes that requires difficult decisions, sacrifices. You're smart enough to understand that." "I understand that you're protecting criminals," Blythe sighed, as if dealing with a difficult child. "I'm protecting the system. The same system that gave you your badge, your authority, your career. Without that system, without order, there's only chaos. Without justice, there's only tyranny." "Justice," Blythe laughed bitterly. "Justice is a fairy tale we tell ourselves to feel better about the necessary evils we commit. You want to know the truth. Sheriff Keel and his department have been instrumental in keeping that county stable for 20 years. Crime rates down, property values up, businesses thriving. Yes, they cut corners. Yes, they targeted certain populations, but the greater good was served." "The greater good," Danielle repeated, her voice dripping with disgust. "That's what you call ruining innocent lives, planting evidence, destroying families." "I call it maintaining the social order," Blythe said coldly, "and I call it smart politics. Do you know how many politicians, judges, business leaders have ties to that department? How many careers would be destroyed if your little investigation went public? The ripple effects would destabilize the entire region. So you're going to bury it. I'm going to protect the Bureau from a scandal that would undermine public trust in law enforcement across the country." He leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen. You and your brother are going to plead guilty to lesser charges. Unauthorized surveillance, mishandling of evidence. You'll get probation, lose your security clearances, and quietly resign. In exchange, the Bureau won't pursue federal charges against your accomplices, and Keel's department continues as is. Maybe we'll suggest some policy reforms, additional oversight, but nothing that disrupts their effectiveness." Danielle stood up, moving to the bars of her cell. "I'll never agree to that." Blythe stood as well, his expression hardening. "Then you'll spend the next 10 years in federal prison, your brother too, and everyone who helped you, the journalist, the judge, the bartender, Officer Thompson. They'll all face charges for conspiracy. I'll make sure of it." He walked to the door, then paused. You have 24 hours to decide. Choose wisely, Agent Carter. Some battles aren't worth fighting. After he left, Danielle sank onto her bunk, her mind racing. Blythe had them cornered. If they fought, everyone who'd helped them would suffer. But if they surrendered, Keel's corrupt machine would continue destroying lives. There had to be another way. That night, a guard she didn't recognize brought her dinner. As he slid the tray through the slot, he leaned close and whispered, "Your journalist friend says hello, says the video is safe." Danielle's heart leaped. Maya had kept recording. The evidence wasn't entirely lost. She's going live with the story tomorrow morning. The guard continued, his voice barely audible. Coast to coast, every major network says to tell you some battles are worth everything. After he left, Danielle allowed herself a small smile. Maya was going to expose everything, regardless of the consequences. The story would break wide open, and no amount of federal intervention could stop it once it hit the airwaves. But they needed to be ready for the fallout. Blythe would come down hard, and they needed leverage to protect everyone involved. The next morning, Danielle was brought to an interview room. Danielle was already there, looking tired but determined. A moment later, Blythe entered with 2 attorneys. "Have you made your decision?" he asked. Before either sibling could answer, Blythe's phone buzzed, then again, and again. His expression shifted from confident to confused to furious as he read the messages flooding in. "What did you do?" he demanded, looking at Danielle. She smiled coldly. "We told the truth." Across the country, Maya Green's explosive investigation was breaking on every major news channel. Not just the story of 2 FBI agents arrested in a small town, but a comprehensive exposé of decades of police corruption, complete with video evidence, financial records, victim testimony, and most damaging of all, footage of Deputy Director Blythe confiscating evidence and threatening witnesses. Maya had recorded everything at the judge's house. Every word Blythe had said, every threat he'd made, every piece of evidence he'd seized. And now millions of Americans were watching a high-ranking FBI official actively covering up police corruption. Blythe's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The FBI director, the Attorney General, congressional oversight committees. Everyone demanding answers, demanding action, demanding his head. "You're finished," he said to Danielle, his voice shaking with rage. "No," she replied calmly, "you are." Within hours, Blythe was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The charges against the Carter siblings were dropped, and the full weight of federal law enforcement, now freed from Blythe's interference, descended on Brant County. Sheriff Malcolm Keel was arrested in his office, along with Drummond, Boyd and Rivers. Chief prosecutors from the state attorney general's office began reviewing every case the department had handled in the past 20 years. Judge Wilkes was appointed as special master to oversee the review process, but the victory came with a price. Maya received death threats daily. Owen's rebuilt bar was vandalized. Officer Lena Thompson was placed under protective custody after attempts on her life. The corruption had roots deeper than anyone imagined, and those roots were fighting back. The Carter siblings knew the fight was far from over. They'd won the battle, but the war for justice would continue long after the cameras stopped rolling and the headlines faded. 3 weeks after the arrests, the old community hall buzzed with energy. Every wooden chair was filled, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. The worn floorboards creaked under the weight of so many bodies, and the evening light filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across eager faces. Maya Green stood at the podium, her notebook open before her. The bruises from her earlier attack had faded, but her determination burned brighter than ever. She adjusted her glasses, scanning the crowd that had gathered to hear the truth finally spoken aloud. "Tomorrow my full investigation hits the press," she announced, her voice firm and clear. 6 months of digging, hundreds of interviews, and thousands of documents. We're exposing every false arrest, every planted evidence case, every instance of brutality that was covered up. The crowd murmured, a mix of pain and vindication in their responses. An elderly man in the front row nodded slowly, tears streaming down his weathered face. His grandson had spent 5 years in prison on fabricated charges. "The story doesn't end with Drummond and his cronies," Maya continued, flipping through her notes. We've uncovered a network of corruption spanning 3 decades, judges who looked the other way, prosecutors who buried evidence, politicians who profited from silence." She paused, making eye contact with faces in the crowd. "But most importantly, this story is about you. The mothers who lost sons to false charges, the business owners who paid protection money, the witnesses who were threatened into silence. Your voices are finally being heard." Judge Clarence Wilkes rose from his seat, his tall frame still commanding respect despite his age. He made his way to the podium with measured steps, each one echoing in the attentive silence. "I sat on that bench for 30 years, he began, his deep voice resonating through the hall. "Watched good people get crushed by a system that was meant to protect them. Every time I tried to speak up, they threatened my family, my career, everything I'd built." He gripped the podium, his knuckles whitening. "But those days are over. Keel's network is exposed, his allies are scrambling to save themselves. Federal investigators are reopening hundreds of cases." His voice swelled with emotion. "This town is ours again." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. People hugged each other, some crying openly. Mrs. Washington stood up, raising her son's college acceptance letter. He'd been released and cleared of all charges, ready to restart his life. Rafael Morales, the former internal affairs investigator who'd first helped the Carters, spoke about the years of evidence he'd hidden, waiting for the right moment. "I lost my career trying to expose them, but seeing this, seeing all of you here, I know it was worth it." Owen Thompson, still operating his bar from a temporary location while rebuilding, spoke about the night that started it all. "When those officers attacked Danielle and Daniel Carter, they thought it would be just another abuse of power. Instead it became their downfall." The crowd turned as Danielle and Daniel Carter entered from the back, making their way to the front. They moved through the audience, accepting hugs and words of gratitude. Their presence commanded attention, not from fear like the corrupt officers had used, but from earned respect. Danielle took the podium first, her FBI badge glinting under the hall's lights. "When we came home that night, we were just siblings wanting a quiet drink," she began, her voice carrying to every corner. "But what happened to us had happened to so many others. The only difference was we had the training and resources to fight back." She paused, looking at the faces before her. "Justice is never given," she declared, her words ringing with conviction. "It's fought for every day in every way possible. Sometimes with badges and courts, sometimes with cameras and protests, sometimes with simple courage to speak truth to power." Daniel joined his sister, their shoulders touching in solidarity. "The men who attacked us thought their badges made them untouchable," he added. "They were wrong. No one is above the law, and no one is beneath justice." He smiled, gentle but determined. "Tonight we didn't just fight for us, we fought for every person they tried to break, every family they tried to destroy, every truth they tried to bury." The hall filled with applause again, people rising to their feet. Young activists who had organized the protests stood beside elderly residents who had endured decades of abuse, united in victory, united in determination to prevent it from happening again. Officer Lena Thompson, now working with the federal oversight team rebuilding the department, shared updates on the investigation. 17 officers have been indicted so far. The FBI's Civil Rights Division has established a permanent presence here. We're rebuilding the department from scratch, with community oversight at every level. Maya returned to the podium, holding up advanced copies of her expose. "Tomorrow the whole country will know what happened here, but more importantly, they'll know how we fought back, how a community found its voice and demanded better." Judge Wilkes nodded solemnly. "This isn't just about punishing the guilty, it's about building something better. A justice system that serves everyone equally, a police force that protects rather than terrorizes, a community where truth matters more than power." As the meeting continued, people shared their stories, years of abuse finally spoken aloud, validated, believed. The weight of silent suffering lifted as victim after victim found the courage to speak. An elderly woman stood, her hands shaking as she gripped the back of a chair. "They killed my husband," she said, her voice breaking. 15 years ago, called it resisting arrest. I knew it was murder, but nobody would listen. Nobody cared." The room fell silent as she continued. "But now, finally, someone is listening. Finally someone cares. Thank you. Thank you for giving us our dignity back." Danielle left the podium and embraced the woman, and soon others joined, creating a circle of support around her. This was what justice looked like, not just punishment for the guilty, but recognition and healing for the victims. As the evening deepened into night, Danielle and Daniel stood together near the windows, watching the community come together. Behind them, Maya was already planning follow-up stories. Judge Wilkes was organizing legal aid for victims seeking compensation. Morales was training the new oversight committee. "We did it," Daniel said quietly. Danielle shook her head. "We started it. The real work is just beginning." She was right. The road ahead would be long. Trials, appeals, systemic reforms, cultural change. But for the first time in decades, the people of this town had hope. They had proof that justice, though delayed, was possible. As they prepared to leave, a young girl approached, maybe 10 years old, holding her mother's hand. "Are you the FBI lady?" she asked Danielle. "I am." The girl smiled shyly. "My teacher said you were brave. She said you stood up to bad people even when it was scary." Danielle knelt down to the girl's level. "You know what the most important thing is? It's not about being brave, it's about doing what's right, even when it's hard." The girl nodded seriously, then surprised Danielle with a quick hug before running back to her mother. Daniel smiled. "Think she'll remember this?" "I hope so," Danielle replied. "I hope this whole town remembers, so it never happens again." They walked out into the night, side by side as they'd always been. Behind them, the community hall glowed with light and voices, a beacon of hope in a town that had lived too long in darkness. The fight wasn't over. It would never truly be over, but tonight at least, justice had won. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in the state capitol was packed for the opening day of United States versus Keel and others. The case had drawn national attention, with news crews camped outside and protesters holding signs demanding justice. Danielle and Daniel sat in the gallery, watching as Sheriff Malcolm Keel, Sergeant Elias Drummond, Officers Cole Rivers and Kyle Boyd, and 7 other members of the Brant County Sheriff's Department, were led into the courtroom in chains. The transformation was stark. Keel, once so confident and threatening, now looked diminished in his orange jumpsuit. Drummond's swagger was gone, replaced by a nervous twitch. The men who had terrorized a community with badges and guns now faced the very system they'd corrupted. The prosecution's case was devastating. Week after week, witnesses testified about planted evidence, false arrests, beatings and systematic harassment. Owen's hidden camera footage played on screens throughout the courtroom, showing officers laughing about destroying lives. The Carter siblings' recording of the drunken confessions echoed through the halls of justice, but it was the victim's testimony that truly sealed their fate. Mrs. Washington took the stand, describing how her son was framed for drug possession to silence her complaints about police harassment. Her voice never wavered as she detailed the 5 years he'd lost, the scholarship he'd forfeited, the future that had been stolen. "They didn't just arrest my boy," she said, looking directly at Drummond. "They tried to kill his spirit, tried to make him believe he was worthless, that he deserved what happened to him, but they failed. He's in college now, studying criminal justice, determined to make sure this never happens to anyone else." Drummond looked away, unable to meet her gaze. The teacher whose career had been destroyed testified about the cocaine planted in her desk, the business owners who'd paid protection money, the families who'd lost homes to fraudulent civil forfeiture. One by one they told their stories, and one by one, the defendant's guilt became undeniable. Judge Wilkes testified as an expert witness, presenting statistical analysis showing the systematic targeting of minority communities. "This wasn't random corruption," he explained. "It was organized, deliberate, and sustained over decades. They created a machine designed to oppress specific populations while enriching themselves and their allies." Maya Green's investigative reporting was entered as evidence, documenting the financial trail, the offshore accounts, the real estate purchases, the payments from development companies, grateful for cleared properties, and then came the testimony about Deputy Director Blythe's cover-up. Federal agents testified about his orders to seize evidence, his threats against witnesses, his attempt to bury the investigation. Blythe himself had already pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice, and was serving a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation. When it came time for the defense, the attorneys tried to argue their clients were following orders, maintaining order, doing difficult jobs under challenging circumstances, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the testimony, the patterns, it all painted a picture of systematic abuse that couldn't be explained away. Keel never took the stand, his attorney advised against it, knowing the prosecution would tear him apart. But Drummond, in a final act of arrogance, insisted on testifying in his own defense. It was a disaster. Under cross-examination, the prosecutor methodically walked him through crime after crime, playing recordings of his own words, showing footage of his actions. Drummond tried to justify each incident, but his explanations only made things worse. "You're saying you hit Agent Carter because you felt threatened?" the prosecutor asked. "She was being disrespectful," Drummond replied. "And that justified physically assaulting her. I was maintaining order by groping her in a bar. I didn't." "That's not what happened." The prosecutor played Owen's footage, showing exactly what happened. Drummond's face went red as his own actions were displayed for the jury. "Still maintaining order, Sergeant." Drummond had no answer. After 8 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. They returned verdicts of guilty on all counts for all defendants. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Mrs. Washington collapsed in tears, surrounded by supporters. Owen pumped his fist in the air. Maya was already typing on her phone, breaking the news to her readers. Danielle and Daniel sat quietly, holding hands, as the judge read the verdicts. No celebration, no triumph, just quiet satisfaction that justice finally had been served. Sentencing came 2 months later. Judge Wilkes had recused himself, and a federal judge from another district presided. The sentences were severe. Keel received 35 years, Drummond got 20. Rivers and Boyd each received 15. The other officers got varying sentences based on their level of involvement. "You were given badges to protect and serve," the judge said, addressing the defendants. "Instead you used them to terrorize and oppress. You betrayed your oaths, betrayed your community, and betrayed the very concept of justice. These sentences reflect not just your crimes, but the profound damage you've done to public trust in law enforcement." As the defendants were led away, Drummond turned back one last time. His eyes found Danielle in the gallery, and for a moment, their gazes locked. She saw no remorse there, no understanding of what he'd done, just anger at being caught, at being beaten. She stared back without flinching until he was forced to turn away. Outside the courthouse, the Carter siblings faced a wall of cameras and reporters. They'd agreed to give one statement, then let their actions speak for themselves. Danielle stepped to the microphone cluster, Daniel standing beside her. Today justice was served, but this isn't the end, it's the beginning. Every day in communities across this country, people are fighting against corruption and abuse of power. Some battles are won in courtrooms like this, others are won in the streets, in community meetings, in the courage of individuals who refuse to stay silent. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. "To anyone facing injustice, document everything, find allies, never stop fighting. The system is powerful, but truth is more powerful. And when enough people stand together, even the strongest walls of corruption will fall." Daniel added, "We were able to fight back because of our training and resources, but the real heroes are the people who had nothing, no badges, no authority, no protection, and fought anyway. The journalists, the judges, the witnesses who risked everything to speak truth. That's real courage." "What's next for you both?" a reporter called out. Danielle smiled. "I'm returning to the FBI. There's work to do, reforms to implement, trust to rebuild. My brother's returning to his unit, and together, we're starting a foundation to help communities document and fight corruption in their local law enforcement." "Are you afraid of retaliation?" another reporter asked. "No," Daniel said firmly, "because we're not alone anymore. This fight has shown us that when people come together, when they refuse to be silenced, they can change everything." 1 year later, the changes in Brant County were visible everywhere. The sheriff's department had been completely restructured, with new leadership recruited from outside the county. Every officer underwent extensive retraining in civil rights and de-escalation. A civilian oversight board, chaired by Judge Wilkes, reviewed every arrest and use of force. The most striking change was in the community itself. The fear that had hung over the town like a fog had lifted. People walked the streets without looking over their shoulders. Business owners operated without paying protection money. Families felt safe calling the police when they needed help. Owen's bar had been rebuilt, bigger and better than before. On the wall behind the bar hung a photograph from that night. Danielle and Daniel sitting at their table, moments before everything changed. Underneath a plaque read, "The Night That Shattered Silence." Maya Green had won a Pulitzer Prize for her investigative series. She'd used the prize money to establish a non-profit training journalists in small communities to investigate local corruption. She still worked in Brant County, now documenting the reconstruction rather than the destruction. Officer Lena Thompson had become the youngest sergeant in the new department's history. She ran the community liaison program, building bridges between law enforcement and the neighborhoods that had been targeted for so long. Former victims of the corrupt regime now worked alongside officers, healing old wounds through shared purpose. Rafael Morales had been appointed as the department's internal affairs chief, bringing transparency and accountability to investigations. Never again, he told his new staff on their first day, "We protect our own by holding them to the highest standards, not by covering up their crimes." The Carter Foundation for Police Accountability had opened offices in 12 states, providing resources and support to communities fighting corruption. They'd helped document abuse in 8 police departments, leading to 3 more federal investigations and countless policy reforms. But the most powerful legacy was in the people themselves. Mrs. Washington's son had graduated college and was now in law school, determined to become a civil rights attorney. The teacher who'd lost her license had been reinstated and was teaching a new generation about standing up for justice. The young girl who'd hugged Danielle at the community meeting had started a youth advocacy group, teaching other children about their rights. On the anniversary of that night at Finnerty's pub, a memorial was dedicated in the town square. Bronze statues depicted figures standing together, hands linked facing forward. The inscription read, "In memory of all those who suffered under corruption, and in honor of those who fought to restore justice, may we never forget, and may we never stop fighting." Danielle and Daniel attended the dedication, along with hundreds of community members. They stood quietly as speakers told stories of transformation, of lives rebuilt, of hope restored. An elderly woman approached them afterward, leaning heavily on a cane. "You probably don't remember me," she said. "I was at the bar that night. I left before it got bad. I was too scared to stay, too scared to help." Danielle started to say it was okay, but the woman held up her hand. "I've lived with that shame every day," she continued. "But watching what you did, seeing how you fought back, it gave me courage. I started speaking up, started going to city council meetings, demanding changes, holding people accountable. At 83 years old, I finally found my voice." She squeezed Danielle's hand. "Thank you for showing me it's never too late to do what's right." As the sun set over the town square, casting long shadows across the memorial, Danielle and Daniel walked through the crowd. They saw familiar faces, Owen and Maya laughing about something, Judge Wilkes deep in conversation with the new sheriff, Morales surrounded by his officers, building the kind of department they could all be proud of. "Do you ever think about that night?" Daniel asked his sister, "about how different things would be if we just walked away?" Danielle was quiet for a moment, watching the community celebrate its transformation. "Every day," she admitted, "but not with regret. That night we had a choice, stay silent, or fight back. We chose to fight, and look what happened." She gestured to the memorial, to the people gathered around it, to the town itself. "All of this started because we refused to accept that badges meant immunity, that power meant impunity. We stood up and others stood with us. That's the legacy I want, not just taking down corrupt cops, but showing people everywhere that change is possible." Daniel nodded. Marcus Hale would have been proud. He tried to expose Echo 7, tried to stop Helion systems. He died for it. But in a way his fight and ours are connected. They both started with someone saying enough, and refusing to back down. That's what it takes. Danielle agreed. Someone has to be first. Someone has to stand up and say this isn't right, this won't continue, and then others join in, and the movement grows, and eventually the walls come down. A young reporter approached, asking if they'd do one final interview for the anniversary coverage. They agreed, settling on a bench near the memorial. "What would you say to others facing corruption?" the reporter asked. "People who feel powerless, who think they can't make a difference." Danielle thought carefully before answering. "I'd say document everything, find allies, trust your instincts, and remember that power relies on silence. The moment you speak up, you break that silence."
The moment you refuse to be intimidated, you challenge that power. It won't be easy, there will be setbacks, dangers, costs, but the alternative, living in fear, watching injustice continue, knowing you could have done something but didn't, that cost is higher. And surround yourself with good people, Daniel added. We couldn't have done this alone. Owen, Maya, Judge Wilkes, Morales, Officer Thompson, all of them risked everything to help. Find your people, build your community, stand together. Do you consider yourselves heroes? The reporter asked. They both shook their heads. Heroes are the people who had nothing and fought anyway, Danielle said. The single mothers who kept speaking up despite threats, the business owners who refused to pay protection money despite the risks, the witnesses who testified despite the danger. We had badges, training, resources. They had courage. That's heroism. As the interview ended and the crowd began to disperse, an older officer from the new department approached. He'd been hired from another state, brought in specifically to help rebuild trust. I wanted to thank you, he said. 20 years I've been in law enforcement, and I've seen departments destroyed by corruption, but I've never seen one rebuilt like this. What you started here, what this community has accomplished, it's a model for the whole country. The community did this, Danielle corrected. We just lit the match. They built the fire. The officer smiled. Maybe so, but somebody had to light that match, and it takes a special kind of courage to strike the stomps when you know how fierce the flames might burn. As night fell over Brant County, Danielle and Daniel stood one last time before the memorial. The bronze figures seemed to glow in the lamplight, their linked hands a symbol of unity and strength. We should get going, Daniel said. Early flight tomorrow. Danielle nodded. They had a meeting in Washington, presenting their foundation's findings to Congress. More corrupt departments had been identified, more communities needed help. The work continued, but before they left, Danielle placed her hand on the memorial, feeling the cool bronze beneath her palm. She thought of everyone who'd suffered, everyone who'd fought, everyone who'd believed justice was possible, even when the evidence suggested otherwise. They started with hate, she whispered, echoing the words she'd spoken a year ago, and built a system of silence. Daniel placed his hand beside hers, but silence breaks when truth finds a voice. They stood there for a moment longer, two siblings who'd walked into a bar one night and emerged as catalysts for change. They hadn't asked for the fight, hadn't sought the spotlight, but when the moment came, when they were forced to choose between safety and justice, they'd chosen justice, and in choosing justice, they'd changed everything. As they walked away from the memorial, Danielle turned back one last time. In the shadows between the statues, she could almost see the ghosts of those who'd come before. Marcus Hale, trying to expose corruption, and paying with his life. The countless victims who'd suffered in silence. The fighters who'd stood up and been crushed. This is for all of you, she said quietly. Justice wasn't given, it was earned, one voice at a time. Then she turned and walked forward, into the night, into the future, into the next fight, because the work was never done. There would always be corruption to expose, power to challenge, victims to defend, but now there was also hope. Hope that when good people stood together, they could change the world. Hope that truth, no matter how long suppressed, would eventually prevail. Hope that justice, though delayed, would finally be served. The memorial stood silent in the town square, its bronze figures linked in eternal solidarity, a testament to what had been suffered, a promise of what had been won, and a reminder to all who saw it that silence, once shattered, could never be restored. The truth had found its voice, and the voice had changed everything.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.